Fantastic. Well, let's dive straight in. What's tip number one that you've got for us today?
Right, so my tip number one is to know how to effectively assess. Obviously, I said that I'm massively interested in assessment. Predominantly because I think when we have a look at what assessment is, fundamentally it is controlled, it's small scale, it's low stakes, and it's the sole purpose of it, at least up until the final exams, is to improve the learner and identify any misconceptions that a learner has. And I think understanding that definition actually enables us to recalibrate the way we see assessment across the course of our curriculum. So I would probably break that into two areas. I think first thing, particularly in an English setting, but this happens a bit more naturally in maths and music, say, is to employ incremental assessment. And the second thing is to employ assessment that enables flexible learning. So I'm happy to talk more about both of those.
This is good, this is good. Can you tell us a little bit more about those two facets, Sarah? Just dive a bit deeper into those last two things, if that's okay.
Yeah, no worries. So the first would be to employ incremental assessment. And I think this is quite a practical way to look at the theories and the discussions that have been coming out perpetually by the big hitter in assessment, Dylan William, who probably from the get-go regretted, he's spoken quite a lot about this, regretting the definitions of formative and summative assessment, because actually he's sort of done a complete U-turn on that and said that every single assessment is formative until the final examinations. And again, that's what we assess for. I'm not assessing to judge. I'm assessing to identify misconceptions, right? So when I'm looking at, say, a Macbeth essay, across the course to get to the end goal, and Dylan William also speaks about this, knowing at first what the end goal is. Say the end goal is that my students can go into a Macbeth exam and write a question or write a response, an essay response to any question that comes up about a theme or character. There are so many steps along the way that I need to break down and skills that I need to know they have to get to that goal. And so I think in your curriculum planning, if you break those skills down, so from the tiniest of they understand the play, they have knowledge about the play, to they can write an introduction, to they can write an analytical paragraph, to they can do that when, say, I give them 3 themes to study and then I throw one at them, to then the complete unknown of the final assessment. And when you do that, then you actually find that assessment becomes very nice and fluid, because all you're trying to assess is, do they have knowledge? And you can do that through using multiple choice, very short answers, very short question and answers, to just getting them to write paragraphs and paragraphs about various different themes, because if they can't write a paragraph, they're not going to write an essay. So it actually enables assessment to be that bit more fluid, and again, low stakes, which is what you want, right? We're just going to write a paragraph today. We're going to really hone in on that. And I think employing that more in English particularly, but again in all subjects, is really the key to making sure that conversations are happening in the right direction, and that assessment is really being used, like I said, to identify these misconceptions and move the learner forward, which is fundamentally the core of why we assess prior to the final examination.
Love this. I love this one, Sarah. So just a couple of questions here. What are some of the ways you see assessments go wrong? What are some of the kind of classic traps that perhaps teachers will fall into where they're not going to get the things that we want to get out of the assessments out of it?
Well, I think the biggest mistake, and I've 100% done this, is teachers will assess without a secure understanding that their students, so they will assess bigger before they assess small. Like I've said, if we look at this incrementally, so they go straight in for those end goals. Like, I'm going to throw this Macbeth essay at them when I haven't yet assessed that my students understand the play. I haven't yet assessed that they can recall quotations. I haven't yet assessed that they understand, what Macbeth is doing at this particular point. And so therefore, if you throw that final assessment at them, actually, it's a waste of time. not just for the student, but for you as a teacher, because you'll be marking, and it depends on how you mark, but what I envision is if you're throwing that bigger thing, it's probably more of a traditional written marking thing, and you'll be like, you need to know your quotations, whereas had you been quite close monitoring in a low stakes way, how well that students knew their quotations in the first place, then it would save the feedback for later if you jump to the bigger assessment too soon.
Interesting. Right, I've been waiting for somebody to ask this to, Sarah. You're just my person here, right? So,
go on.
A mistake, well, I think it was a mistake that I used to make was all my assessments were topic themed. So an example here, 2 weeks teaching the kids Pythagoras, and then here comes the Pythagoras end of topic assessment. Now, the reason I think that was a mistake was because you get this kind of illusion of mastery. The kids nail Pythagoras, and then we move on to the next topic, and then they nail that one. But of course, because I haven't been doing retrieval, it's all performance, and they've forgotten it, in the high-stakes exam. Another problem with it is it gives the message that cramming is actually quite an effective strategy, because if you know exactly what's going to be on the test, and you just absolutely hammer that for 3 hours the night before, you're probably going to do all right on it. Then you get to, your GCSE, where it could be on anything, and then you realise that strategy isn't going to be effective. So I thought I had that sorted. But then I hear people say that actually, no, it's a good idea if the kids know exactly what they're going to be assessed on, so that they can prepare adequately, they can learn these effective revision strategies and so on. So where do you stand on kind of topic-themed assessment versus kind of anything could be on the assessment?
I think that's a great question. And actually, I recently spoke about this. I think if you break down, at least this is how I think about it, but I do think it's an effective way. And I've seen educational papers do this in a different level for biology, where they break down the learning journey into these 4 categories. As a novice learner, a rote learner, an inflexible learner, and a flexible learner being the final. And I think what we sometimes do, and that was going to be my second point where I was talking about assessment to encourage flexible learning, is we sometimes, when we prepare students incrementally, perhaps too much, we get them from a novice to a rote learner so they can recall what we're saying. Then we get them to an inflexible learner. Like you said, they have this mastery in what we've given them because they've had adequate time. But what they can't be then, we're not assessing them then in how to be a flexible learner, which is where they get given a situation of the unknown. So I completely agree with you that there needs to be incremental assessment to build confidence towards a particular topic, but what we definitely need to throw on top of that is that level of flexibility, is where it is a completely unknown environment and they're able to apply the knowledge to that particular situation. And I think where we can really build this in quite a lot is in the Key Stage 3 curriculum. I think kind of taking what Mary Myatt says about the Key Stage 3 curriculum needing to be the intellectual powerhouse of our curriculum design, I think what we should be doing is spending a lot more time in the Key Stage 3 curriculum, not just route learning and building mastery towards particular subjects, which we might do more at GCSE, but actually throwing in very odd, flexible learning situations, such as, right, you've learnt Romeo and Juliet, here is a picture. Apply what you know about Romeo and Juliet to this picture, just enabling that level of play with learning that I think you really only, if you think about it, most students really only get flexible learning when they go into their examinations. And then it's no wonder that they fall down, because we actually haven't tested them necessarily in the unknown, in the ability to apply all of that into a completely unknown situation. And that's where you get students who get thrown at GCSE when they have, for example, I remember a few years ago, there was, sorry for the English examples, but, there was a Jekyll and Hyde question a few years ago. And obviously Jekyll and Hyde, you think themes, I think duality, power, concealment, fear, you think of all of these classic themes which teachers would have taught, and then they would believe they're teaching flexible learning because they're like, oh, they can go in and do these, but actually there's still an element there of unknown. And the question was help. how does Jekyll and Hyde explore help? And what they would need to do is go, right, well, there's a fear towards help seeking, there would need to be that complete level of flexible application. But it meant that a lot of students fell down. So I think just teaching to subject specifics, as you've given that example, I think will have that negative effect. I think where we could really utilise going a bit beyond that is earlier on to encourage students to be a bit more confident in situations that they're not prepared for.
This is interesting, this. Just one more thing from me on this.
Yeah, go on.
I don't know if this is a math-specific thing, so I'm interested in your perspective on this. But one good thing about kind of topic-specific assessments is you can go a bit deeper. So if I'm asking you, if I've taught you Pythagoras, and I set you like an 8-question assessment, low-stakes quiz or whatever, on Pythagoras, the chances are the final 2 questions we're going to be going pretty deep. It's going to be some conceptual understanding, maybe I'm weaving in some different areas of maths, maybe it's contextual, all that kind of stuff. Versus, if you do mixed topic assessments, what tends to happen in maths is that they then almost revert to quite kind of surface level procedural style knowledge, because all of a sudden you've got 8 questions. So I'm only going to ask, say, one of those questions is going to be Pythagoras. So I'll probably just ask kind of a procedural Pythagoras question. Then I've got another fractions question. I'll just ask, quite a straightforward fractions question. And my fear there is when you have these kind of mixed topic assessments, you don't really get that depth of understanding, assessment of that depth of understanding, because you're trying to cover too broader spectrum of content. I don't know if that makes any sense, and if you can relate to that in any way in your subject.
I would come back, and it goes with the purpose of the tip that I'm trying to say. Like, what is the purpose of that assessment?
Yeah.
So why are you developing an assessment with 5 or 6? And is it because there is a need that these students will go into an exam or go into a particular thing where they're going to need to switch very quickly between those different schools of knowledge, in which case assessing that is super important. We will eventually in English get to a point where students are going to need to stop writing Shakespeare midway through a 2-hour exam and start writing about poetry. So actually assessing eventually that they can deal with the exhaustion of that time and that mental shift is actually really important for us. But if you're just trying to trick them and trap them, there's probably no purpose to that assessment, because again, how useful is that feedback? And again, if we're just looking at assessment with that core definition of being purposeful because we are trying to figure out where students' misconceptions are and how to move them forward, then there's no purpose to trapping them by doing that particular exercise either. So I think that's where you would see probably some assessments being planned poorly. And I've had the fortunate experience of moving into a head of department role, and that has given me a lot of autonomy. And every time we have an assessment, we sit down and we say, right, this is what our assessment looks like. Is this what we want our students to know? Is this assessing them in all the skills so that we can identify their misconceptions to move them forward effectively to the next thing that we're doing, and that, because that is that purpose. It's not to trap them, it's not to judge them. It is for us to know that they are in the right academic place to move forwards comfortably and appropriately.
It's really interesting. I've never thought about that, practicing the switch between topics. That's really interesting, that's fantastic.